is a model that should be replicated across Atlanta and the country. In conversations with my peers, I'm excited to tell them about PrintPak's positive experience with Year Up Atlanta and to encourage them to be partners as well. So based on our initial experience, I'm happy to let you all know today that PrintPak will be hosting another 2 Year Up interns beginning Monday. Thank you. We've already met with our new interns, Dexter and Sabrina, and we're anxious to get started again. And so finally now, I'm honored to help recognize the other 8 inaugural intern partners for Year Up Atlanta. Partners are key to this program's success, and without their participation and involvement, this historic occasion would not be taking place. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Steve, for those remarks. And see Kwaku Forstall, and if I could also invite our Atlanta Board Chair, Mr. Cecil Conley, please, to join us up here, and Mr. Gerald Jertavian, please. Thank you. It is my pleasure to recognize our 9 inaugural partners, and going to ask a representative from each partner location to join us up here on stage. And to start with, let's give PrintPak another round of applause. 2 interns and Mr. Steve Kavanaugh. Excellent. And our largest inaugural partner, SunTrust Bank, Brent Yamato. Could you join us, please? Yeah. SunTrust is hosting 6 interns. Thanks, Brent. And McKesson, could I have Jeff Bogus please join us on stage? Thank you, Jeff. And Mr. Bruce Clayton, Senior VP for Genuine Parts. All right. Okay, and Kaiser Permanente, Teresa McBee, Director of Operations, please join us. And for Southern Company, Brian Groark. Thank you. And Concessions International, Basil Banco, CIO. Thanks, Basil. Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta, Jackie Lee, Senior VP. Very good. And Director of Client Services for Aaron's, Daniel Morales. Here's Danny. Thank you so much. We're so thrilled for the relationships that have been built, and very excited that 8 of our 9 inaugural partners are renewing with us, and we'll be hosting interns starting this Monday. And the only partner who is not hosting an intern, we're cutting them some slack because they've hired Terry for a full-time position. So, all right. Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you.
We're going to keep the program moving, although we encourage you to continue to enjoy your lunch. I get to introduce another star from our class, graduating class. They're all stars. A few are going to be able to present and speak to you. This young man is a gentleman who I think you'll be very impressed with. We selected him to introduce our keynote speaker. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Reginald DeRoselard to the stage.
Good afternoon. I have been given the privilege, and it is a great honor to introduce to you today our keynote speaker for today's ceremony. Ambassador Andrew Young has been known as being one of the top aides for Dr. Martin Luther King during the Civil Rights Movement. He is currently the founder and chairman of Good Works International, which performs economic development in the Caribbean and Africa. He has been awarded over 60 honorary degrees, including from his alma mater, Howard University, and Morehouse, which named its Center for International Affairs in his honor. Our keynote speaker has served as an ambassador to the United Nations under the Carter administration and as a U.S. congressman. He is a champion of the Olympic movement, which resulting in 1996, Atlanta hosting the Summer Olympics. He has served on numerous boards of directors, including Dr. Martin Luther King Center for Nonviolent Social Change. As a former mayor of Atlanta, he has helped Atlanta gain the reputation as an international city that it now enjoys today. And that is one reason why Atlanta is a great place for Europe to be established. Ladies, gentlemen, and guests, it is my great honor and privilege once again to introduce to you today our inaugural graduation keynote speaker, Ambassador Andrew Young.
I'm going to start with a young man just about 100 years ago, walking into Atlanta barefooted. He had shoes, but he tied the shoestrings together and he put them on his shoulder. He was about 19, but he came to Atlanta with only about a fourth grade education. So he started in Atlanta in fifth grade. He went on and finished Morehouse College. In the meantime, he married the daughter of a preacher who was the pastor of Ebenezer Baptist Church and gave birth to a son named originally Michael Luther King, but soon changed his name to Martin Luther King. I say that because what we enjoy here goes back to very simple origins. If Daddy King, as we called him, had not had the courage to go back and start all over as a grown man in fifth grade and make up for all that he had missed growing up down in Stockbridge, Atlanta wouldn't be the way it is today. About 80 years ago, there were three other people born. One named Portman, one named Loudermilk, and the other named Russell. They were all born poor. Charlie Loudermilk borrowed $500 from his mother, who ran a kitchenette, dinette, and rented and bought $500 worth of chairs and tables from an Army surplus store and started a furniture rental business, which now has 1,700 stores and probably is worth about $3 billion value. Charlie Loudermilk, that's Aaron's, one of our sponsors. John Portman was from the wrong side of the tracks. He probably wouldn't have been able to get into Georgia Tech if it hadn't been for the United States Navy. Not because he wasn't smart enough, but because he wouldn't have had the connections to get to Tech if it hadn't been for the Navy V-12 program. John Portman, starting out as a poor boy in Atlanta, is probably the only person in the world that can say that they have developed 17 blocks in any major city in the world. But everything downtown that rises up above 20 feet, 20 stories, practically John Portman built. And It wasn't easy, but he did it. Herman Russell was probably the richest one of the bunch, because his daddy had a construction firm, and we were kidding him saying that he wasn't born with a silver spoon in his mouth, but he was born with a silver plastering trowel. And he learned how to plaster before he was 12 years old. And he bought his first house at 15 and renovated it himself with spare parts from his father's projects, and rented that house out, and that's where he got his spending money in high school. You can go down the line, but I'm thinking about this because I helped to honor these three men last week. And I realized they were all born in the middle of a depression that was worse than this one. And yet they all reached a level of success that none of them could have imagined, but that you and I take for granted now. But we're in the midst of a similar kind of recession 80 years later. And so I'm not welcoming you as interns and graduates of Year Up. I'm figuring I'm presenting these things to the people who are going to get us out of this recession. I'm not thinking of you as interns, as entry-level employees. I'm thinking of you as the entrepreneurs, the developers, the visionaries that somehow are going to help this nation compete in a global market that people my age and generation are just beginning to understand. That's not easy, but you're just beginning. But I can remember being about 15, and I was not a good student. And I was catching hell from my daddy. And one of his friends happened to be doing a residency in psychiatry. And he said to my daddy, "You don't have to worry about this boy. He's going to be a leader." I looked at him like he was crazy. He said, "No, in the world in which we live, he's already close to the top of the pyramid." He said, "There's so many poor people who don't have the opportunities that he has already, that he's going to have to give them leadership, or they're going to drag him down and destroy him. And he's a survivor." Well, at that time, my daddy just wanted me to get out of high school. But what he said is still true. It may be more difficult, but maybe not. I was in China back when I was in the mayor's office, and walking down the streets in Shanghai, a group of young people just about your age came over to see me and said, "You're from America?" I said, "Yes." "Where are you from?" In good English. I said, "Atlanta, Georgia." They said, "Empire State of the South." Aaron Turpo and his wife were with me, and she said, "Well, I'm from South Carolina." And another one said, "Oh, you're a Tar Heel." And she said, "No, that's North Carolina." And then he scratched his head a little. He said, "The Palmetto State. That's your competition." But you have something they don't have. They are in a state-run system that will stifle their freedom. Remember all of the problem we had getting black and white together? You've read about it. In China, there are 104 national minorities. And in spite of their strength and their size and their market potential, the social fabric of China is going to be strained to the point that it's going to take some of us to help them learn to get their racial and ethnic mix together. And we're going to have to help them because we owe them so much money. And that if they go down, we're in trouble. But we are leaders. You are already a leader. 70% of the people in the world can't read and write in any language. By virtue of the fact that you have had experiences in school, you've had experiences in a free market economy, you've had the assistance and association with people who have generated this as one of the great cities of America. They're not 5% of the people in the world have not had what you have gotten in Year Up. And I'm not talking about Africa, I'm not talking about India. I'm just saying that the number of people who have had your kinds of opportunity and experiences. And I would say that you can be ever so bright in China or India or Nigeria or Brazil and still not have what you have had. The experience of growing up and living in America is unmatched by anything on this planet. I remember when I first went to Europe, I'd read all of these things about, European history, and I realized that I was living with rich folk. And they didn't have central heating. They still had a fireplace. And we had heating systems. I'm saying that the whole world, visiting in Japan when Japan was supposed to be buying the nation. I visited a gentleman who was one of the billionaires in Japan. He invested about $200 million in Atlanta, but his apartment in downtown Tokyo, it wasn't as big as the space around 2 tables in that corner. And it cost him $2.5 million. When he came to Atlanta, he bought a house. I said, "What are you doing with a house?" He said, "You can't afford not to buy a house in Atlanta." He said, "They're so cheap." So he bought a house in Dunwood and he brought his children here, and he sent them to let them live there because it was the best way to educate them. And they all went to Georgia Tech and Emory and University of Georgia, and they all did well. But the richest of the rich around the world don't have the kinds of experiences that you got in Europe. So you've got to change your way of thinking and realize that you are a leader now. And what you do is going to shape the world in which we live. I don't know whether John Portman could have imagined that he'd build a 70-story building. I don't know whether he could have imagined a 70-story building even. But he's now building in Seoul, Korea, the second tallest building in the world. That's a poor boy from Atlanta, from the south side of Atlanta. There's something, it's not in the water, it's in the spirit. There's an Atlanta spirit that has made us something special. And I think it's maybe because we had so many problems, but that nobody ran from those problems. And I give Coca-Cola a lot of credit, because Coca-Cola is, colored sweet water with a little carbonation. And they can sell it in 200 countries in the world, and everybody loves it. I say Coca-Cola has sort of, I call it a sacrament of civility. Because when people are drinking Coca-Cola, they're not fighting. They're not arguing. You know, and I've been in Nigeria and Islamic areas where, in a big banquet room where they're toasting, and they don't drink champagne, they toast in Coca-Cola in a little champagne glass. But they brought back to this city a global attitude at a time when nobody else had it. There was a commitment on the part of Mr. Woodruff that American soldiers should be able to have Coca-Cola anywhere in the world that they went. And so everywhere they went, they sent Coca-Cola. And people liked it. So when they came back, they left the little bottling company and they sold them syrup. And carbonated sweetened water has taken over the world. But they came back here and they said, you know, we saw what happened in South Africa. We saw a society deteriorate when they separated racially. And Paul Austin, who was from LaGrange, Georgia, and there's hardly a more conservative place in the world than LaGrange, you know, 50 years ago. And yet he comes back here and he says, this is not going to happen in my native Georgia. We're going to learn to live together. And so we're probably the only city that integrated from the top down. And I know almost, I don't know the people here, but when you say print pack, I remember Erskine Love, because he was one of those leaders that helped break down those walls. I remember Jimmy Williams. I said, Jimmy Williams is the most powerful man in America that nobody knows. But nothing has happened in Atlanta. Nothing has happened in Atlanta since I've been here, and I've been here 50 years, that he didn't have a word in behind the scenes. But nobody knows his name. So you don't have to be known to get things done. In fact, one of the things that Ralph Bunche criticized Martin Luther King for was getting too famous. Now, there wasn't anything he could do about it, but Ralph Bunche was worried and said that he was the second man in the United Nations who happened to be a poor black man who went to UCLA on an academic scholarship, and ended up getting letters in track and basketball, and then getting a degree at Harvard, and was the first black man to win a Nobel Prize. But most of us don't even know his name because he didn't want to be known. And his notion was that he could get almost, and Jimmy Williams is that same way. Stay behind the scenes, let somebody else the credit, just make sure it gets done. And that's part of what we've got here. And Dr. Bunche was saying to Martin that, I'm sorry, you're right about Vietnam, but I'm sorry you got involved. I hate to see you stretched on two fronts at the same time. We need you. And it's dangerous to take on too many things, but we were too far along then. But you see what has happened here in this city? When I ran for Congress, there were less than 1 million people, and they put that sign up on Peachtree when we first got 1 million people, and Sam Massell was mayor. I passed it the other day. It was 5,581,063,000. I passed it 2 weeks later. It was 5,581,000. Some people see that as extra traffic.